COVID-19, they called it an emergency before they called it a world, and the streets learned how to hold their breath. Tape looped around benches like bandages, doors learned the click of a new kind of lock. Shop aisles grew arrows that taught feet to move like obedient fish. Upstairs, windows became televisions for the skybirds, sirens, the rare flash of a runner cutting through the hush. On every screen, a clock began to count, not hours but numbers. Graphs stood in for weather. The voice behind the podium changed, but the cadence did not. Flatten, shield, distance, comply. A mother stitched masks from old shirts. A child fogged a pain and drew a heart that looked like a question. They said the origin was a market full of breath and fur and chance. They said the origin might also be a room with white walls and careful hands, and a door that did not close quickly enough. Both stories fogged the same glass, and the glass kept its secrets. Rules bloomed overnight like frost. Parks were cordoned while trains ran full. Alone on a bench was unlawful, while queues under fluorescent light were essential. In one town, sunlight was dangerous. In another, fluorescent aisles were safe at 8:30 on Tuesdays. The tape knew more law than the air. Phones learned new tricks. Codes became passports. A pocket buzz meant exposure. The map in your hand knew where you had been, and sometimes where you were allowed to go. The feed learned the shape of your doubt and fed you the opposite. A sentence could vanish between refresh and reply. A credential could become a muzzle. The chorus was loud and in tune. Soloists sang in empty rooms. Old men waved from behind glass. Women with soft hair and steady hands rationed gloves. Vans idled at midnight outside care homes, where doors had opened too soon and closed too late. Applause came at the appointed hour, then faded into the drone of refrigerators. Syringes thawed and lined up like patient birds. Sleeves rose, paper rustled. Consent became a ritual of nods. Fast was a virtue now. People told their stories in snatches. A day of metal in the bones, a sleepless night, nothing at all. Fatigue like rain that lingered and left. The line kept moving. Some sat apart and were called names that did not fit their mouths. Silence gathered under white coats and in the margins of journals. And the margins were tidy. Small doors stayed dark. Big doors learned how to swallow the world. Another quarter closed and another ceiling rose. Words like reset and build back and better arrived wearing the same suit in different capitals. A banner curved across an alpine backdrop and the font was familiar. The numbers kept changing clothes. With became from, then back again, depending on where you stood and whose pen you borrowed. Models drove policy. Policy corrected models. The chalk arrows stayed underfoot. A story traveled of a man who died by speed and counted his breath. Then did not. Then did again. Somewhere a clerk adjusted a cell in a spreadsheet and a headline took its shape from that invisible hand. In the attic of the internet, someone pulled down an old cardboard box labeled drill and found a scenario with pre-written lines. In the server rooms, code that had waited for a Y slipped easily into an out. The moderation queue learned to tell the difference between certainty and curiosity and chose certainty. Accounts thinned. Arguments changed rooms. There were maps of signals that reached backward into months before the word became common. There were coughs remembered from autumn, and photos of office parties where nobody knew the alphabet yet. There were patents already filed for instruments nobody thought would be needed, then were. There was a rumor that became a question, that became a brick wall, that became a footnote. Years folded into each other like paper cranes. Tape lifted from floors and left pale ghosts. The arrows remained in the mind, a faint tug toward one way. Hands still hesitated over door handles. In drawers, the laminated passes slept like retired soldiers. On mantels, photos of faces with creases at the eyes, more than the mouth. What did we learn? That light in a fridge can feel like salvation. That policy can sound like weather, and weather like fate. That control can arrive dressed as care, and care can feel like control. That trust is a fabric, and once torn it mends with visible seams. That an empty city hums with the sound of compliance. That grief scales without spectacle, and leaves chairs vacant in the quietest ways. In the evenings, balcony shadows told stories to each other. One shadow said, "This was a storm, and we did what storms demand." Another said storms do not need QR codes. A third said both can be true. The moon listened without comment. When the bells rang again for weddings and school doors and stadium lights, the question did not step down from the podium. It wandered instead into kitchens and buses and stairwells, into the soft place between headline and habit. It looked like a heart drawn on glass by a small hand. It asked, quietly, whom the counting served, and why the tape was tighter in some neighborhoods than others, and how silence learned which names to hold. They called it a pandemic, and it was. They called it a plan, and perhaps parts of it were. They called it a lesson, and it is still being graded. Between the sirens and the graphs, between the briefings and the balcony songs, a world discovered how quickly it could be rearranged, and how hard it is to put the furniture back where it was. Night falls, windows, light. A nurse takes off her shoes at the door. A clerk closes a spreadsheet. A child uncaps a marker and draws another heart. The pain fogs. The question stays.